Welcome to today's podcast. My name is Pearl Burr and I will be your host. Today's guest is David Collins from Charlottetown, PEI. Welcome, David.
Thanks for the opportunity.
I recently had the opportunity to hear you, David, speak at WorkSafe NB's annual health and safety conference here in Fredericton. I believe David has a message that we can all hear, that we all rather need to hear, and one that we can certainly all relate to. Just another day on the job, so to speak, then something happened. David, why don't you start by telling us about yourself prior to your injury?
Yeah, well, first I just want to thank Pearlie and the team for this opportunity. But yeah, it was, prior to my injury, I guess, where to begin. I had a normal childhood. I was born in Newfoundland, grew up in Ontario. My parents moved to Ontario when I was really just a baby. And then when I was 14, so in 2000, moved to Prince Edward Island, and had a really good decent childhood. Prior to my injury, I guess, looking back, I was in grade 10, just finishing up the last day of high school. I guess that's where the story begins at that point. But I was just normal, had nerdy child, just loved to learn, loved to, I like to be organized. I like to, it was just being, I figured normal, I suppose.
Were you into many activities at that point? Any specific activities or interests, hobbies?
Yeah, I wasn't really into sports per se, but would, play basketball with friends and do that. I'm just trying to think of, hobbies back then, are quite different than my hobbies today, but, just hanging out really with friends and just relaxing and, it was, I don't know,
So your job at the golf course, tell us about that and talk to us about the night that you were injured.
Yeah, so my job at the golf course was, I was a dishwasher, and I was just starting off. It was my second season at the resort. So I worked at a resort in Eastern PEI, golf resort, but I worked in the kitchen. So washing dishes was, at that point, I guess my goal was to become a chef. And so most chefs start right at the bottom and they start as dishwashers and kind of work their way up. And that was my plan, was to work my way up. The job itself is pretty explanatory. It's washing dishes, but, part of the role was at the end of the night having all the compost and all the garbage and taking it to the other end of the resort where the dumpsters were. And so that's kind of where the story then starts. It's, we had access to a golf cart. And so these are just not your regular golf carts. These are like the club carts, I guess. They're like super, super powerful. And so we loaded all the garbage up into the golf cart and decided, we were going to go for a joyride. And we had done it before. We had, done joyriding on the golf cart. Back then, they didn't really care. So you got to think I was 16 at the time. And I didn't have a license. I had epilepsy as a kid, so I wasn't even allowed to have a license, even if I did try to go for it. The guy that I was working with that night, he didn't have a license either. So, and we weren't being supervised ultimately. So it was at the end of the night. All the chefs had gone. It was just me, just myself and the other dishwasher there, who was the same age as me. And, so we loaded it up and we decided we were gonna go for some joy rides to the golf course. So at the end of the night, or at the end of, joyriding, we dumped up all the garbage, and we decided that we would go for one more rip around, and that's what changed everything. So, in all, we started doing donuts, and we were whipping the golf cart around in circles, and I was in the passenger seat, and we hit a rock. Almost tipped the golf cart over, except I fell out, and then he whipped around and hit me, just as quick as that. And it's crazy to think and look back of how life changes in such a moment. But in that moment, everything changed for me. So right away, I remember laughing about it. Of course, he slammed on the brakes and stopped, asked me if I was okay. Yeah, I'm fine. And then it was the moment when I went to actually get up was the moment that I knew something wasn't right, and and so I started, touching my legs, and it's like I can't feel my legs. I can't move my legs. And my coworker that was with me thought I was joking around at first. Like, no, that's not funny. And it's like, no, this is serious. And so we were afraid. We were 16 years old. We were like, I think at that time we were more concerned about the consequences than we were of, my injury, that we were going to get in shit by the leaders, by the resort, by whoever. I think, there was definitely that feeling in the air that night. And as I started freaking out, and it's like, I can't feel my legs. I'm in shock. It's the middle of the night. It's midnight, or thereabouts. And the only lights that we had in that area were the lights from the golf cart. And so, my coworker said, I'm going to have to go get help, right? And I was like, you can't leave me here. Like, and we did probably the worst thing that we could do in that moment. And he tried to lift me up into the golf cart, and the doctors, say after the fact, there's no way to determine how much more damage that did cause, but it definitely didn't help the situation. Because I was dead weight from the waist down, he wasn't getting me into the back of that club cart or the golf cart. So he had to end up having to leave me there in the dark, looking up at the stars, and I remember like just going through my head and picturing myself in a wheelchair and looking at, just playing basketball with friends and not being able to do it, and just kind of cycling all this through my head. Meanwhile, there was a sense of, maybe my legs are just broken, right? And thinking that maybe it's just, there's nothing, it's not a spinal cord injury, it's just my legs are broken. But deep down I knew it was more serious because when you think about it, it's like if your legs are broken, you can still move your legs. So yeah, it was laying up looking up at the stars and just crying and doing a lot of movement, of course, not advised with a spinal cord injury. So I would sit up and lay down, because I didn't know what to do. And there was no pain really at that time. Like when the golf cart hit me, it didn't run me over. I just kind of rolled around in the front of it, but there was no real pain at that point in time. So it's, which is kind of surprising, but I hear that, in that sense, a lot of people in shock don't feel the pain right away. But what ended up happening was, my coworker ended up finding another manager or supervisor at the resort who came and held me down, would not let me move, braced my head. He knew exactly what he was doing, and very thankful for that, because at that point it's like I've already done enough damage. Let's not do any more. So he held me down. They said, help was on the way, ambulance was on the way. My brother actually worked at the resort as well. He worked at a different part of the resort, and they were able to find him. So he had called my parents at the same time. And so they showed up roughly around the same time that the ambulance showed up. And yeah, that's where everything changed at that moment.
What all did you suffer for injuries at the time?
So when I ended up going within hours, going directly to Halifax, and they determined that, I broke my back. I ended up seeing a neurosurgeon who determined that it was a burst L1 fracture. So essentially what that means is the L1 vertebrae exploded, and bone fragments went everywhere. So the bone fragments went into the spinal cord, which caused the paralysis, and into the nerves in my back. And so that was that was what was causing everything. So I went over to Halifax. They didn't want to do surgery right away because they said there was a lot of swelling in that area, and they wanted the swelling to go down. You got to think, when the ambulance came that night, I was put on a backboard, and I remained on there until I went into surgery, 3 days later, and it was the most uncomfortable, when and you can't eat or drink because you don't know when you're going to go in surgery, which was, it's like, I'm thirsty, I need water, and it's like, no, you can't have that because you might go in surgery. Which, it is what it is, but I remember, so I went into surgery, on day 3 after the accident, and just remembering being very scared because, of course, then it's my first real surgery that I've ever really had, so I've never had any experience. And so, of course, they have to tell you all the, possible outcomes and deaths and, more paralysis, and, because they're playing with your spinal cord. And just remember being super scared that I could come out worse off than what I was, but at that point it had to be done. So they went in. The first surgery was around 7-8 hours. And what they ended up doing was they had to take out all of the bone fragments. So it's, you would think that the bone would just crack but it literally exploded into bone pieces, and they had to go in and individually remove all these bone fragments that had scattered everywhere. And even I went in for a second surgery a few weeks later, and there were still bone fragments in there that they had missed the first time. So within the first surgery, they removed the bone fragments. They put in 4 titanium rods in my back to stabilize the vertebrae. They took a bone graft off my hip, which afterwards was for the first little bit, it was the bone graft on my hip was like the biggest problem. And I remember, having to go in for cortisone shots into my hip because my hip was bothering me more than my back was. But, so they took the bone graft and put it in. They created a new vertebrae. They fused, my T12 and L2, and L1 all together. So, I have a fusion in my back, that stabilizes the L1 vertebrae that's there. So they did all that in the first surgery, and it was probably shortly after the first surgery. It's kind of a little hazy, but after the first surgery, that's when I started getting some feeling back, some movement. Of course, they were coming in every hour, to do a neurological assessment, and, touch you with a needle and ask you, can you feel this? Can you feel this? And doing it all throughout the night. And I remember the first couple of weeks, it was tiring because you couldn't get any sleep because they were waking you up to do this neurological assessment. But after the first, that's when I started getting a little bit of feeling, some movement in my legs, and that's when I first started with physio, and going and visiting, having a physiotherapist to come into the hospital room. I was in a wheelchair, was only allowed out of bed for 1 hour, per day. And so I remember, Mom would take me down. We were in Halifax, and take me down just to get some fresh air and take me outside, and just so that, there was some normalcy, I guess, to what was happening. And I never really, Mom, just when she got that call that night, she was on her way. She wasn't prepared. She was just, midnight. She was in bed. So she showed up with whatever she was wearing, and that's what she landed in Halifax wearing. And that's, and that's the point to make. Like, when these things happen, it's in a blink of an eye, and no one's prepared for it. But yeah, it was a long road to recovery at that point.
So what all have you had to go through as far as rehabilitation? I guess most people, they break an arm or something, and 4 to 6 weeks, and it's sort of everything's over. I assume in your case, it's been a long journey.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's 20 years actually. Like,
Wow.
a couple of weeks ago, I had my 20-year anniversary, and so it's still it never really ends. So right off the bat, like I said, started going to physio in the hospital room. I was in the hospital for 4 months in total, which was a lot better. When I first went in, they told me I could be in there 7 months to a year. So 4 months was great. But that was just because I started getting more movement. So it started off with, a lot of physiotherapy in the bed, and then progressed to maybe I can take a step and maybe I can stand up. And so physiotherapists have all these contraptions that kind of, help you. They had the brace your legs and but it's you're standing up via a machine and not on your own accord. But it was a good way just to kind of get the muscles going. And it's crazy to think about how you just can't move your legs. One day I was walking and the next day there's no movement in your legs, and it's hard to explain that to someone that's never experienced a spinal cord injury or paralysis. You want your legs to move normally, but they just don't. But yeah, so I started feeling the movement in my legs. By at the end of August, so my accident was in mid-June. By the end of August, that's when I took my first step. And I just remember it took every ounce of energy I had to take that one, and it was just a small little step. And it knocked me out for a day or two. But with that, I got up and took that one step again until I felt comfortable or had enough energy to take a second step. And so it kind of was, rinse and repeat, kind of let's do this until you feel comfortable. And so I have a picture of me taking my first step, and so the physiotherapists are standing beside me, and I have this machine that kind of helps me kind of pull myself up, but it's on my own accord. And taking steps and then graduating to like the parallel bars and using those. And so the rehabilitation was something that definitely didn't happen overnight by any means. And it took many years to get to where I'm at today. And so I've plateaued, but, so after the hospital, I went to a local, just a clinic, and it became a full-time job. You got to think, I was in grade 10. I missed a whole year of high school because of my accident, because when school started, I was still in the hospital, and then now I'm having to go to physio for, 3-4 hours a day. And so, yeah, I missed missed a whole year of high school, which was, fine. It all worked out in the end, and I was able to graduate and continue on. But at that point, I had to focus on physiotherapy, because I had goals. I had created a goal that I wanted to walk, and to get to that point, you have to put in a lot of hard work to get to that point. And so, like I said, 20 years later, still in physio. It comes and goes just depending on, I had a setback last June. And, I had to go back into physiotherapy. And so it's just, I've built really good relationships with physiotherapists in PEI, over the years. And, yeah, it's just crazy to think 20 years has gone by.
Now, when it comes to your mother and father and your brother, obviously extremely difficult on them. How have they made out through this process?
Yeah, so it was extremely difficult for everyone. Um, Mom came with me to Halifax, so Dad stayed home, and I have a younger brother. So Dad stayed home with him, and we had to adapt. Like when I came home from the hospital, we had to do some renovations to the house, put on a new deck, a new bathroom so that it would be accessible. By the time I left, I was using a walker, or arm crutches, I guess, at the time. So I still had some mobility. I wasn't in a wheelchair, fortunately, but I still had some mobility issues. But yeah, I think it was tough for everyone, and that's what you often hear. It's not just the person that's been injured, it's the whole family and the extended family, and having my grandparents. I was just in Newfoundland just to see them just last week. But when I had my accident, they came up to see me. My aunts, uncles, they all came to see me to support me, because at that point in time, I needed support, but so did my family, right? And Mom wasn't working, while she was in Halifax with me, right? And so there was a lot of, and working with the Workers' Compensation Board at that time was a lot more difficult, than it is today. And there was a lot of roadblocks that they put up, which they shouldn't have in that scenario. They made it harder and more stressful for us. But that being said, they've definitely turned the page and have changed their ways over the years. So I'm very grateful, and I have a really good relationship with the Workers' Compensation Board now. But yeah, with my parents, it was just tough going for them.
Now, yesterday we did a podcast with the folks from Threads of Life, provide support. Have they been able to help you out any?
Yeah, so I feel like the biggest thing with Threads of Life for me would be the fact that I know that I'm not alone in having a workplace injury. They have family gatherings every year across Canada. So ours is always in the Halifax area, for Atlantic Canada, and I've attended several over the years, and hearing and meeting people that have also had a significant tragedy, workplace tragedy, and meeting people that have lost loved ones, and hearing their stories, it brings everything in perspective that I'm not alone. And I think that's the whole point of it, is to bring people together so that they, feel supported. And in in the gatherings that they have, they have breakout sessions to help people. Maybe it's a group of people that are needing more emotional support, or, right, like there's different breakout sessions that they have that, that you can pick to go to. But yeah, for Threads of Life, it's been a great opportunity, and they've given me the opportunity to share my story in many forums, and, across Canada. I tend to speak to a lot of students, when I do my presentations, because especially younger students, they need to hear that they're not invincible, that they things things can happen, and life can change in a blink of an eye.
So what's next for you, David? As far as, I'm sure, as you said, you originally wanted to be a chef. So where are you at today relative to where you'd like to be going forward?
Yeah, so I wanted to become a chef. Not a chef. However, I love to cook at home. I'm a foodie. Love to cook. I love to eat out. Love to eat in general. So, that hasn't changed. But, when I did go back to high school, it was like, okay, well, that plan needs to be changed. And I was kind of lost at that point because I had a plan that I was going to go into culinary school and go that route. And now all of a sudden, so I had a teacher that kind of took me aside one day and knew that I had, things had changed and I didn't know what I was going to do. And think I had several courses with her, math and business and those types of courses. And so she took me aside one day after class and suggested, have you ever thought about going to business school or doing something with business? She's like, you definitely have the mindset for business. And so that's the avenue that I took, and the path that I took. So I went to, I finished high school, a year later, which that bothered me, at the time. Now I look back and you graduate, it doesn't matter what year, but I just kind of, it bothered me because I wanted to graduate with my peers that I had gone through high school with, and instead I was graduating with a bunch of strangers, per se. But, I then went, right into university in 2006, and started, at UPEI in the School of Business, and went that route. And it was tough. Being disabled at that time, accessibility wasn't really a big thing or really thought about. So a lot of the buildings at UPEI are very old and not accessible. Fortunately, like I was walking, at that point, without assistance, but still had mobility issues. I always joke about, if there was a serial killer coming after us, I would surrender myself and let you run away because I literally cannot run. My legs, again, is just like you want to run, or, if you offered me $1 million to run, I literally cannot. So, it was tough, going to university, and having classes that were up on the third, fourth floor of a building, and I'm having to navigate stairs. And I remember in the winter time, falling in the parking lot around because, things weren't plowed or assaulted, and it's just, but I would go in and try to address those things, just so that they were aware. But it was definitely, it was tough, and it was tough all around. It was, not just university, just navigating life in general. 16 years old, being injured, having a significant injury like that, and having to now navigate life in a whole different path. It definitely brings everything to perspective, and 20 years later, I look back, I'm like, how did I do all that? And how did I, there was a point where I was in university full time, working full time, having a social life full time. And now I look back and I'm like, how did I get through that? But it was, so today, I went through university, which was, I guess, I didn't actually finish university because of my condition and because of my health. So I was a full-time student for 3 years, first 3 years, and then I got critically ill and was in the hospital for 7 months. And then that put everything up in the air. So I had 3 years done and just 1 year to go. So the last number of years I had been picking away at finishing my degree. And that was a goal that I've had. And I have only 2 courses left, so I'm just a bit there. But it's been tough because now I deal with chronic pain. And so that takes all the energy, any spare energy that I have, it's consumed with chronic pain. And so that's been tough. But for all, I'm pretty successful. I work with CU Financial Management as their manager of operations and administration. So even though I deal with all this, and my leader kind of said, I don't know how you do it all, but I manage. And I think anyone with a significant injury, they learn how to manage it. But I love my job. Operations, you kind of have your hands on all parts of the business. We're a newer company, so we're starting from scratch, which is fun, and building a company up. But I'm very fortunate to have a leader that recognizes that I do have a disability and that I do deal with chronic pain. And so if I have a bad night of pain, it's nothing for me to just, hey, bad night, I'm going to sleep in for an extra couple hours. No problem. He'll respond. And then I'll just work an extra couple hours. I work from home now, which is very, it's definitely a life changer for me, to have that flexibility of working from home. Especially when my back is bothering me. And so again, I'm very fortunate and I've had leaders all across, my career. I've been in financial services now for 15 years and have had great leaders all across the board. And I peg that to just me being open and honest about what I'm dealing with. And getting them to see but at the end of the day, as long as the work's getting done, that's what matters. And when I'm there, I'm 100% in, I'm focused, and I guess that's what makes a difference. Like being a manager, and I have 9 people that report into me, and they all understand. They all, I'll send the team message, hey, bad day, not going to be in. They all get it. And some of them have seen me in pain and seen me spasm. So it's good to have a supportive team, supportive leader, that makes my, it just takes that bit of stress off the back of my shoulders.
Look, David, thank you very much for joining us today and sharing your message. It's a message, yes, everybody needs to hear, and certainly for students, as you pointed out, they're not invincible, but they need to be reminded of that, and keep telling your story. It's an excellent story that folks do need to hear.
Yeah,
thank you.
No, I was just going to say the last point, if students are listening to this podcast, I think the biggest point that I like to bring up when I speak to students specifically is they have the right to refuse unsafe work. And a lot of, students don't know that. And I think it's important that they understand they're in a situation where they feel like it's unsafe. For me, it was a little bit different. I was joyriding a golf cart and, I didn't really think life would change with that. But I know, speaking with employers, over the course of time and talking to different people, there's opportunities where students can be and not know that they think that because they're told to do something that they have to do it, and if they feel unsafe, step up and speak up.
Well, look, thank you again, David, for sharing your story with us. We always like to receive feedback, so if you'd like to get a hold of us, you're listening today to our podcast, you can reach us at pearly@ssnb.ca. And for all those folks listening today to David's story, thank you very much for listening. Take care and have a safe day.